Good afternoon to everybody that has joined us, and good morning to some of the other people that I know that are joining us from the morning times. Welcome to today's WRASAP Network quarterly meeting. My name is Esmeralda Mandujano, and I am a part of the California Agribility Program here at the University of California in Davis. Our program is responsible for hosting this network quarterly meetings for the Western Regional Agricultural Stress Assistance Program, and I also serve as our WRASAP network quarterly lead and networking efforts. Today, we're going to hear from results and implications of the WRASAP Agricultural Workers Survey from Drs. Michelle Grocke-Dewey and Dr. Alison Brennan from Montana State University. But before we dive into the presentation, I want to give you a little bit of background of WRASAP and where the efforts come from. So WRASAP sprouted from sprouted from a program funded through the United States Department of Agriculture and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. The program is called the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network Grant, and it establishes regional networks that connect agricultural producers. This includes farmers, ranchers, farm workers, and others in the agricultural related occupations with resources to assist them in times of stress. There are 4 U.S. regional programs, and WRASAP is the program that covers the West. In the West, we cover 4 territories and 13 states in the West. We have a lot of partners throughout this area because we understand that this mission to address farm stress across the West is a one thing fits all. So there's different programs, trying different programs across the different states and different agricultural sectors. So WRASAP includes 4 main efforts: a clearinghouse. In this clearinghouse, we build a comprehensive searchable database to facilitate easier navigation of resources. More specifically, our clearinghouse is very closely connected to the efforts of farm aid. We have also focused a lot on extending call staff from hotlines that were already operating in the West. More specifically, what we did for the West is that we expanded the operation hours and the training for line staff to better support agricultural populations. And the network portion and efforts of the program include collaboration and expansion of the network to ensure culturally humble outreach and support in the region. And when we say culturally humble, I also want to highlight that in there, we also take into consideration the culture of farming. We also have a mini grants program. The applications are currently closed, but the programs that were funded are currently being implemented. So what we're here for today is our network quarterly meeting. In this meeting, we bring together stakeholders to be able to build connections and collaboration to assist agricultural producers in times of stress. We also focus on improving behavioral health awareness, literacy, and outcomes for agricultural producers, their families, and their communities. This part is really important because we understand that our farmers, farm workers, we all live in a society, in families. So we want to make sure that we're addressing being able to provide support to others, not just the farmer or the farm worker or the producer. Collaborators also present their efforts and offer opportunities for collaborating and posting questions and bring experiences to the table so that we have this open space so that we can connect with each other and learn from what others are doing in other states and also what we're doing either in the West or in the whole United States and also the territories. The meeting is open to the public and to external partners. So after this meeting, you'll get information about the upcoming meeting. We invite you to extend the invitation to other partners. So quickly today for our agenda, we're going to go over the background, which we already did, and we'll do a quick icebreakers, and then we'll hear our presentation on results and implications of the WRASAP Agricultural Workers Stress Survey. Then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. I know that their presentation is packed with information, but we will be able to have a little bit of time for questions, and if need be, we'll also stay after the meeting for you guys to be able to ask questions to either Michelle or Alison. Then we'll do quick event announcements and then we'll close. So for our Zoom breakouts, again, because it's a networking event, we want you to meet others that are here with us today. So we'll invite you to share your name, your role in your organization, what organization you're with. If you're not with an organization, let us know what community you are calling us from, or what role you are doing, or why you're interested in these topics. And then we ask you to answer the question, what is your favorite thing about the fall? It can be fall festivals, weather, food, holidays. The fall is starting in about a week. So we want to hear what is your favorite thing about fall? And if that has to do with helping you reduce stress, that's bonus points if you want to share. So Angelina is going to help us break out into the rooms. We'll have about a minute per person, and then we'll come back for the presentation. Great. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the breakout rooms. I hope you met some wonderful people. I know I did in the one that I went to. Learned some fun things, but we're going to move on to the presentation for now. So for now, we're going to hear from Drs. Michelle Grocke and Dr. Alison Brennan. Brief introduction for them. Dr. Grocke is an assistant professor in the Health and Human Development Department at Montana State University and the Health and Wellness Specialist for MSU Extension. She received her PhD in medical anthropology in 2016 and has spent the past 10 years researching the social, cultural, and environmental determinants of non-communicable disease and subjective well-being in rural areas. Over the last 3 years, she has been spearheading efforts in WRASAP and more specifically in the baseline group. And then Dr. Alison Brennan, who will do the majority of the presentation, is an assistant professor in the Health and Human Development Department at also Montana State University and mental health specialist for MSU Extension. MSU just got lucky with these two. What can I say? She received her PhD in developmental science for North Dakota State University in 2016, and some of Dr. Brennan's research interests include gardening as mental health promotion strategy and the connection among food, access, nutrition, and mental health. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Alison. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Esme. And as Esme noted, we have quite a lot to get through. So I'm hoping we can share the questions and comments for the end. And then if people want to hang on and ask questions, they can, but want to try to get through this in a timely manner as much as possible. So let me just, can I get confirmation that everybody can see this?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So Michelle and I will be presenting the aggregate data from the baseline agricultural worker stress survey. And so this really is the companion to the survey that we've already completed and analyzed and published research on with agricultural producers. And so this has really the same basic sections as the egg producer survey. So we asked about, you know, their perceived stress, sources of stress, interest in different topics, and different approaches or strategies for getting them information, as well as outreach efforts. But some items were different. And that's particularly true in the section about the specific stressors for ag workers, as well as preferred topics. So Michelle will explain a little bit more about how those items were compiled when we get to the slide that reports on top stressors. So just watch for that she'll kind of clarify. And we really did this in an iterative process. So we learned some things with the ag producer survey that we then applied to the surveys with workers. So in today's presentation, we'll start with an overview of the characteristics of our survey respondents, and then report on their perceived stress levels and top sources of stress, followed by preferred topics for stress management, and then preferred dissemination strategies. And throughout the presentation, we're going to make comparisons to the results of the ag producer surveys. So with that, I will hand it over to Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you all. Thanks so much. And I suppose in the introduction, Esme forgot to add that I'm also a mom today to this sick kiddo. My son Kai will be hanging out with me as long as we can handle it, and then may turn it over to Alison when we near the end, but we'll see how this goes. So before I dive into demographics, I did want to just thank everybody from all the states and territories that helped us collect this data. We realized just how much harder it was to get data from our farm and ranch workers than it was from the producers. And so really just thanks to everybody who walked around, gave out surveys, back to English. It was really a team effort and quite a long haul to get all the data that we're able to present to you today. So the next couple of slides are all demographics. So we were able to hear from quite a few workers, 515 to be exact. And you'll see that we have a pretty equal split between female and male. You'll see the bottom left pie chart there is gender. And on the right here, you'll see a table with all the different sample size from all of our states and territories. So the ones that are starred, that have stars next to them, the N was high enough that we're able to make a separate report for those areas. The ones that are red and starred, you'll see those are territories or freely associated states out in the Pacific. We did make an aggregate report that's already published that you'll see on our farmstress.us website. But unfortunately, for example, Alaska, Arizona, Hawaii, Idaho, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, and Utah, we just didn't simply have the numbers to be able to make a separate state report. But for the rest of you, we will be creating those, and please be out on the lookout for those. They'll be published on the Farm Stress site. But you see 115 in total, and on the next slide here, we have a couple more demographic pieces to go over.
Just a sec, it's not responding. There we go.
There we go, perfect. Okay, so just two kind of simple figures here. On the left, marital status, just did want to tell you that we heard from married workers, those that are single, some that were cohabitating, divorced, widow, widower, and then we did have 13 folks choose not to respond to that specific question. So throughout the presentation, when you see a missing statistic, that just means they filled out the survey pretty generally, but perhaps selected not to respond to a certain question. One thing to point out is that when we look at ethnicity race, so when you look at the right-hand side of the slide, we saw a lot more variability and a lot more diversity than in our ag producer survey amongst our workers, which may not come as a surprise, but we are happy that we were able to capture some of this diversity in our survey. You'll see that white respondents did make up the majority, but we also heard from quite a number of Hispanic Latino respondents, and then you'll see many ethnicities too that are representative of our U.S. territories and freely associated states. Turning it over to Alison for some more demographic information.
All right, so if we look at the typical level of education, again, a lot of diversity going on here. The majority of folks fell into the category of having completed high school or received a GED, but also a fair number having some form of college background, whether that's trade school, an associate degree, having done some college, but maybe not completed, and then bachelor's degree. So just a lot of variability here. And one thing I should point out that is a little different from the producer survey is if you look at the lower levels of education, a lot more representation. So for example, 8th grade education. And then some other additional interesting facts we wanted to include. The average number of months per year that our respondents reported working on a farm or ranch was 8.85. Mean age, 38.5, so just a little bit lower than the egg producer survey. And then mean years in agriculture, 13.7, again, just a little bit lower. This one is astounding. more than 4 out of 5 of our respondents said they have at least one additional job. So in addition to working 9 months of the year on a farm or ranch, they're saying, yes, we also have another job. And actually, when you drill down and look at the breakdown, it's about 1 in 3 that say they have 2 or more jobs in addition to working on a farm or ranch. And then types of work, year-round, really the most common that we saw, but certainly seasonal, and then migrant, and a number of people who did not report here. All right, Michelle, let's talk about stress.
Yes, thank you. So I'm sure a number of you on this call have read the producer report, but for those that haven't, let's just go over how we measured stress. We decided to use the PSS, or the perceived stress score. This is a measure of perceived stress, which our team thought was quite important to measure, because it's really your perception of how stressed you are that matters in terms of mental wellness and your overall well-being. And so what this is it's a set of 10 questions that ask the respondent to think back retrospectively 2 weeks and say, okay, in the last 2 weeks, did you feel X or did you feel Y? Were you not able to do certain things? And then at the end, you can quantify their responses and you wind up with a score between 0 and 40. So you'll see that here on this figure, most of our workers are sitting in that medium stress with an average of 18.1. So they're between 14 and 26. We were very pleased that only 6.4% were in that very high category. But still in the medium category. The creators of this, they were psychologists, Sheldon Cohen and his group in the late 80s. And even those in that medium category, those are really folks that we want to give or provide positive coping techniques, the availability of face-to-face counseling, whatever kind of ways that they're interested in learning positive stress management techniques, because they are certainly under a level of stress that can become concerning. So you'll see that most of them are in that medium range. You'll see 46 people did not respond to all 10 of these questions, so we weren't able to capture them. And then we have 2 other interesting comparisons on this slide. The first one is that when we looked at this by gender, oftentimes this can be quite different, statistically significantly different between gender, and it wasn't. So we didn't see a difference there between our female and male workers. And then if we look at this in comparison to our producers, nearly the same, which we thought was an interesting piece of data. A little bit lower, our workers are a little bit lower, but 0.2 is the difference there. So you can pretty much say that, across our worker and producer population, pretty consistent medium perceived stress level.
Yeah. And then if we look at age groups, this is one where we looked at this in the ag producer survey as well. And among our workers, there is a significant difference in perceived stress score by age group. And the difference specifically occurs between those in the youngest age group, so 18 to 32 years of age, who reported the highest perceived stress level, and the third bracket, which is ages 40 to 48, and their reported PSS total was 16 on average. And it's really interesting because then we see in the 49 plus, it bumps up. And when we looked at this in producers, sorry, my screen share just did something strange. Just a moment. Let me redo this. That is so weird. I don't know what happened. Okay, let me put it back up. Here we go. All right. Now that should display correctly. Are we good?
Looks good. We can see it.
Okay. Yeah, so when we looked at this among egg producers, the difference was between the youngest age group and the oldest age group. And so it's interesting here that among the workers, we don't see that same pattern of consistent reductions with age, but rather there's a bump up among the oldest age group.
All right, so on this slide, the
All
next.
right, Michelle.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Alison. So in addition to asking folks about their perceived stress, we wanted to dive a little bit deeper and say, okay, well, what are these sources of stress? What is stressing you out? And what this is, this table with the two columns are all of the different line items we asked workers about. And we wanted to spend a moment just talking about what we asked, because a lot of time and, let's say, consideration went into creating these lists. Everything in red are things that we didn't ask producers when we did that survey. I mean, in hindsight, it might have been nice to ask some, but we really tried to differentiate these lists and think about, okay, what could things be like lack of water for drinking hygiene, or a mobile lifestyle, potentially substandard housing, or transportation, lack of transportation, things that could have been particularly stressful for our part-time, full-time migrant farm workers, ranch workers across the West. So you'll see we asked about quite a lot of things. Many things we also did ask producers. So again, everything that's in black text there, we did ask producers the same exact way. But you'll see things like community violence, difficulty getting to the US for work, discrimination, racist treatment, drug, alcohol use in their community, family separation, the list goes on. So just to kind of go over, and what we did is we piloted a lot of these with ag workers throughout the West in different states and kept getting feedback so that we could really make sure this list was pretty encompassing of what sources of stress our workers would face. All right, back to you, Alison.
So as we looked at the top sources of stress, what we did is we collapsed this down so that we're looking at those who said that these things caused them stress fairly often or very often. So we collapsed those into one. And that's what we're really looking at here in our top sources of stress, is the percentage of people who said that fairly often or very often this was something that caused them problems. And so as we look at this list, working in extreme temperatures, it was actually asked as working in very hot or very cold conditions. Of course, when we're talking about the West, a lot of it's that extreme heat, but certainly there could be extreme cold. But I mean, I think we're thinking about our Pacific Islands and California, New Mexico, Arizona, right? Where we're really, by and large, talking about working in extreme heat. So that's certainly an interesting one that we see among our ag workers. And then you'll note these other ones: long working hours, lack of time, low wages, financial worries, lack of work and family balance. Recall from our participant characteristics that we've got more than 4 out of 5 respondents who have at least one additional job, and about 1 in 3 who have 2 or more additional jobs. So these stressors make a lot of sense when you think about their occupational circumstances and their daily lives. So they're putting in hours and hours of overtime, working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. And so you can see how this would all become a lot of stress in daily life. Some of the worker-specific stressors, they're not on this particular top 10, but they're still pretty prominent among our respondents that I wanted to mention were A language barrier, 46.2%. Discrimination or racist treatment in the community, 42.4%. And family separation, 40.3%. And so when we publish the aggregate report, you'll be able to see all of the different stressors and the percentages for every single one. And so here, we've just got the top 10, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there are certainly some that show up that are unique to ag workers and are prevalent as a source of stress. And then I do want to also briefly mention grief, and this is grief due to the death of a loved one or community member. And this one, with our ag workers, this is more than twice as high as it was among ag producers. So it was only 21.2% among farmers and ranchers in the ag producer survey, and here 51.9%. And I also will say that in the Pacific Island territories and freely associated states, it was the #1 stressor, and 70.9% of people said this was a problem. And then if we look at the top 5 stressors among our ag workers compared to ag producers, some interesting things here. So the ones that are in bold are unique to that group. So the working in extreme temperatures, which I mentioned, and low wages. But then if we look over at our ag producers, we see production costs, and we did not ask workers about production costs, just like we didn't ask the producers about low wages. But I just think it's interesting that we're really getting at kind of the same thing here, which is your personal income, and it's a stressor for both. And then we did not ask the workers about legislative issues related to ag, and so we see that one show up among producers. But I was really struck by the similarities here. So lack of time, financial worries, lack of work and family balance, a lot of common themes.
Thanks, Allison. So we've talked this whole time about, either stressors or perceived stress. Once we get into sort of 2/3 the way into this survey, we start asking workers about, okay, well, what stress management topics are you most interested in learning about? We think, this is almost my favorite question on the survey, because it really helps us in terms of thinking about, okay, how can we help? What do people want to learn about? You'll see that everything on the left-hand side is a stress management technique or strategy or a positive coping mechanism of some sort. We have nearly all of them up here on the screen. There's a couple that are missing, but as Allison mentioned, a full inclusion of the data will be in our report. But you can see that 67.1% wanted financial assistance. It makes sense given the stressors. But there's a lot of other things that we might not have necessarily thought of if we hadn't asked so directly, right? So the second one is retirement planning. Think back to our demographics and our stress level by age. That upper age bracket was, again, very stressed out. So a lot of that can come from retirement planning and not knowing exactly what to do. We have a lot of sort of health promotion or, like physical health type things, like physical activity as a stress management technique. People wanting to learn about how they go about becoming or being physically active, in addition to their work on the farm or ranch. I'll talk about the next couple, but then there's a couple main points I want to make. So nutrition and cooking, relationship support, sleep. But really, I think the big takeaway from this chart is if you look down, I don't know if you can see, I don't think you can see my cursor, but all the way down to grief counseling, that's still 44% of the respondents that were interested in that, which tells us that it doesn't really matter which one of these we're working in. If you're working in any number of these, people are listening and they are wanting that assistance. So it was much less divided than with the producers. There was very clearly a couple that people really wanted. Whereas here with the workers, it's way more spread out in terms of what people are wanting to learn to help with their stress. All right, go back to Alison.
With the exception of drugs and alcohol, nobody apparently wants to hear about drugs and alcohol. All right. So then we looked at differences again by gender and age. And if we look at those preferred topics by gender, the top 5 really show up in a different order, but they're all shared as preferred topics, except for training on tractor or equipment driving and safety, which was tied for 5th among male workers, but nowhere near the top 5 for female workers. So I think it's interesting here that aside from that one topic, it's all really similar levels of interest, just in a slightly different order. But when it comes to our age categories, we see a lot more going on here. So again, lots of shared topics of interest, albeit ranked in kind of different orientations across the age groups. So in particular, retirement planning was in the top 5 among all 4 age groups. And then physical activity, general stress management, financial assistance, and nutrition and cooking showed up in the top 5 among multiple age groups. And the topics that are bolded in the table are unique to that particular age group. So for 18 to 32, we've got sleep. Ages 33 to 39, relationship support and tractor or equipment safety. Ages 40 to 48, career or vocational support, and then ages 49 plus, mindfulness.
All right, so this next bit of information takes it a step further. So if you're all out there listening and perhaps you're working on one of these topics as a stress mitigation strategy, we were curious, okay, how do farm and ranch workers want to receive this information? What is their dissemination strategy of choice? Do they all want to go to workshops? Do they all want to gather this information online by themselves anonymously? Do they want to talk to someone in an informal group? I mean, there's all these different ways that we can present information, stress management information to our worker populations. So this chart is quite telling. You'll see all the different strategies that we asked about on the bottom. The top one, kind of by a long shot, 188. So these are absolute numbers. So 188 people preferred face-to-face counseling and said that's the one that I would like to obtain, have access to, et cetera, in order to reduce my stress. Social media was another really big one. So people want stress management information, again, from those topics that we were just talking about via social media, kind of easy to grab. Makes sense that because time is of the essence, time was a big stressor. People are having trouble with work-life balance. So social media is kind of something quick and accessible. Online self-guided class without an instructor. So classes where someone can scroll through and learn and do the modules without a synchronous class time with an instructor. But looking across, I mean, even if you kind of go to about halfway in the middle of this figure, even, a general telephone helpline, which we do work very closely with WRASAP, I mean, many people, over 100 respondents said, yes, I would prefer that. So really you can go all the way down. The one that came in as the least preferred was telehealth counseling. And then again, to see a little bit more detail of this, we will let everybody know when our report is finished and you can take a look at all of this in more detail.
Mm-hmm. All right, so to summarize, important takeaways and implications that we think you should take note of. that the youngest ag workers reported the highest stress levels, which is the same as among our ag producers. There were no significant differences in PSS by gender in this sample of ag workers. Even though we asked some of these questions differently, it's really interesting that ag producers and ag workers are experiencing many of the same stressors. Grief is a prominent stressor. There was a lot of interest in face-to-face counseling among our ag workers, ranked #1 among 17 options, and face-to-face counseling was ranked #5 among ag producers. So a lot more willingness to engage in that particular way of receiving information. Social media is also a dissemination strategy that many folks preferred. So good on you, Esme. I know Esme maintains a lot. She posts a lot on social media. So well done. And then an implication then is making face-to-face counseling more available could be a really important avenue to reach a lot of ag workers in the West. But important to note that it needs to be free, because many ag workers indicated lack of health insurance as a major stressor. It was about half of them that said the lack of health insurance was a major source of stress. And of course, when we think about, well, you know, a lot of them are also worried about low wages and their financial status, we need to make this free as much as possible. And then lastly, many ag workers were interested in a wide array of stress management topics. So that's really encouraging news for those of us doing outreach to know that there are lots of different avenues by which we can provide help.
So I saw a couple of questions come in the chat, Allison. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the chat box. The first one that came in was about looking at ethnicity and preferred stress management topics by ethnicity. This, one second, sweetheart. Yeah, you can put it back. Sorry, everyone. We will be able to look at topics by ethnicity. There is some of this already in our territory report. If you want to look by ethnicities from folks from the territories, we have to just be careful that we have a high enough N in each of those ethnic group categories. But from our Latino respondents, we would have enough there to take a look. And so you'll see that broken up when we produce our aggregate report and be able to see, is there a difference between topics and dissemination strategies? Allison, can you take the next question?
Yeah, so we didn't ask specifically in a way that we could know why it's the age 18 to 32, but I think, you know, a lot of it, I think, is the pressure for a lot of people right now economically. I think about things like housing and just the cost of living kinds of things. And I certainly think that for some people, climate change is another factor among our younger ages that about, and that weighs heavily. But also when you think about a young person, 18 to 32, just complexity of things that's going on with them. Identity development, right? A lot of times in fairly new relationships, could be having children. And they did, if we look at the stressors as well, with the work-family balance, and they're trying to just navigate a lot of different things at once. Elena, could that be partly because of social media pressure? It could be as well. There's just so many different factors I can think of that might contribute to that. But in terms of hearing directly from folks in those age categories, I think that would require delving into the qualitative interviews that were done. And I'm not sure with the workers how many of those we have.
Yeah, that's sort of, as you all might recall, we did the surveys with workers, and then those that volunteered and wanted to sign up for an interview, we did call and conduct 30-minute interviews with them. We have not yet looked at that data. We haven't had time. We wanted to get this done first. Among our producers, when we looked at age and stress, one thing that really came to light was those that were a little bit older were, or at least said in their interviews, that they then at that point in their life had learned more stress management techniques. They had learned more coping strategies that were able to help them with the same stressor. So again, that's like a little bit anecdotal. It came from our interview data, but we had farmers and ranchers say, you know, something like a weather event or something that had happened to me when I was younger, I now am able to simply just cope better with that. So we'll see if those same types of responses come up in our worker interviews. And again, let everyone on this call know once we have been able to dive into those. Is there another one, Alison? I'm trying to see. Oh, Elena's comment. Yeah, great comment.
Yep.
I wish we could have asked folks to elaborate on the survey, but glad we have the interviews.
And Michelle and Alison, the 18 to 30, the question that you guys already answered, do we know the reasons why ages 18 to 32 are reporting higher stress levels than the other age groups? Do you think that that could potentially be because perhaps the younger generations are, I don't know exactly how to say this, but they have more language accessible to them to speak about stress, whereas some of the other generations may not. That's not really even language that they were taught. Could that be
I
something?
think you make I mean, that's an important question because I think also there's more willingness to admit that things aren't going well among younger groups. There's less of that mental health stigma. And so it could be that they're just willing to say, yeah, I've been having these problems and this has been an issue for me. Yeah, or that they're more familiar with the language that is used to explain what experiencing stress is like.
Or maybe even recognizing that what they're experiencing is stress.
Alison, will you go back to the preferred topics by age?
Yes. Oops, sorry, let me exit out of the chat box here. There we go.
Yeah, just with this conversation, it made me think again, and I mean, being like pleasantly, maybe a little bit surprised, but that mindfulness and that type of stress mitigation showed up as a top topic for those 49 and older. I mean, just kind of given what we're talking about, receptance to certain things and, you know, ability to voice being stressed out and having mental wellness challenges. So perhaps we can, you know, take some of this as a, gosh, what's the right word, but as a motivator, right, to reach out to some of these folks in these age groups with this type of programming.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, Alison and Michelle, for starting to give us a little bit of what's going on with the results of the baseline survey. I know that there's still a lot of numbers to run, specific ones for the specific states. I'm really excited that California, we have enough data to have our own California report. So I'm looking forward to continuing to dive into it. And then when you guys are done with the interviews and evaluation, we'll definitely have you again so that you can let us know what you found out from those interviews. And it was also, I want to thank you for making those comparisons of what are the differences and similarities between the farmer and the farm workers, because with WRASAP, we can't just talk about either the farmer or the farm worker. We talk about the producers because they're all producing and really they're experiencing a lot of the same stressors, maybe not the exact same way, but what the farmer is experiencing in terms of stress, the worker is also picking up on that. So it's really good to have the insight of both groups. So again, thank you both for giving us your time, and thank you to Kai, to the youngest member of our team, for joining us today. He was really good on the meeting. kept it going, everything well. So I'm gonna jump now onto the announcements before we adjourn. So at the beginning of the meeting, I kind of gave you guys an overview of WRASAP and different efforts across the different states. One of our partners in Oregon State University is still conducting question, persuade, refer trainings. These are suicide prevention trainings. You can find more information in the registration for this at farmstress.us, and they are conducted both in English and in Spanish. These are virtual workshops that you can join. Another strategy that we are implementing with workers and also with promotores with WRASAP is that we did a lot of outreach workshops with promotores. We're hosting one in California, an Encuentro de Promotores, or a gathering of promotores, on September 23rd, 2023. The focus will be immigration and mental health. And for this, we have a lot of agencies collaborating to put this event together. So again, the work that we're doing, we don't do it alone. We try to collaborate so that we can get deeper into the communities and try to find the different ways that the farmers, farm workers, and community in general want to receive services. And then lastly, I'd like to invite everybody to the Agribility Regional Workshop that's happening in Hawaii from October 17th through 18. It's going to have a lot of topics on farm stress. So our WRASAP lead, Don McMoran, will be presenting. Several of us will be presenting there on topics of farm stress and also agribility related topics. I'm going to pop in the chat the links for learning a little bit more about the events and registration, everything in there. Lastly, I'll let you know that it's important to get involved, continue the efforts of WRASAP and also your own farm stress addressing efforts. So we invite you to join the network. You can go to farmstress.us to sign up for our newsletter to receive more information on what's going on with WRASAP, or if you want to start collaborating with us. And again, WRASAP is open to everyone. So with that, I want to thank you for being here today. We do have like 3 minutes left for any leftover questions. Can be general. I see somebody saying, wish I could be there. Alison's going to be at another event. She cannot join us that day. But I'm just going to pop into the chat really quickly the links for the Agribility Regional meeting, which is coming up in October. Where it's also warm. Yes, Hawaii should be warm, I hear. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today.
I'm gonna wait.